Hey guys, welcome to Storytime, a not so frequent series I'll be doing on occasion where I tell stories from my personal life experiences about instant karma and pro revenge. If you have any stories you would like to share with us, let me know in the comments or just send me the link for Reddit so I can read it out for everyone. But for the time being, I think it's enough that I make a fool out of myself. So without further ado, let's go with a very recent story that happened approximately a month ago. I am a member of a martial arts society, and due to the COVID pandemic, most of our club activities were halted due to the restrictions. And when the said restrictions were lifted, we decided to have a little get-together and celebrate the occasion. And as it is most often the case, in every group of people, you will find one person that is, well, not entitled, but they do have a very high opinion about their social standing in the said group. Ours was called Kevin. And he was more interested in promoting his business and himself in the club and through the usage of our club members. Honestly, it was a miracle that this guy was still in the group. And some of us even speculated that he had some dirt on our master, so that's why, but I digress. It turned out he was just an old friend of our master, and that's why. Anyway, let's get back on topic. Kevin had a tendency to ignore anyone who wasn't of any monetary use to him. And not just socially ignore you. He would actually ignore the fact that you even existed. Or he treated you like scum and blamed you for everything. Just to give you a few examples, this man would punch you or try to push you away if you tried to correct him during practice, and then would ask for a different partner because you were disrupting him. If you said hi to him on the street or even asked him to help you, he would just walk by without saying a word. I'm not kidding. When the new equipment we ordered for the training hall got delivered, several of us showed up earlier in order to unload the truck and set everything up. As if on cue, Kevin showed up as well, but instead of helping or holding the door open for anyone who asked him, he just walked into the building and closed the door behind him. When someone confronted him about it, his response was, "I'm a senior member of this group, and carrying equipment and luggage is beneath me. You juniors should be doing it." And here's the kicker. In terms of seniority in the club, he is the lowest ranking member at the moment. Luckily, we had free grappling that day, so you can imagine how well that turned out for him. But I digress. Let's get back to the actual story. As I already mentioned, due to the COVID pandemic, most of the club activities were cancelled. But as those restrictions got lifted, we decided to organize a little get-together in order to celebrate the reopening of our club. We all brought snacks and drinks, dressed in a fancy manner, and spent a pleasant evening chatting like lords and ladies of high society. And I honestly have no idea why I did that accent. Honestly, I thought it would be funny, but that didn't go out right. Anyway, the party was going great. People were chatting, having fun, and Kevin was trying to coax one of my friends into doing a commercial for him. At first it was funny because she kept rejecting his offers every time he mentioned them. But it quickly grew boring, so I decided to go outside to give her a phone call and a decent excuse to get away from him. When I got outside, I noticed that there was a strange man snooping around the parking lot with a phone in hand. At first I thought it was a Pokemon Go enthusiast who just found a rare Pokemon or something, but when I noticed that the guy had a crutch in hand, I got closer and asked him if there was a problem. And as you can probably guess, there was. Somebody parked on a disabled spot, and that certain someone was Kevin. The man with a crutch was the tenant of the building, and he just called in a tow truck to remove the car so he could park and go home. And as you can guess, he wasn't very happy about this whole situation. But he wasn't spiteful or rude because of it. So when I mentioned that I knew who the car owner was and I could ask him to come out and remove the car from his parking spot, the man was more than willing to actually call off the tow truck. He did warn me that the tow truck will be here in a few minutes, so I didn't have much time. I quickly went into the building and looked for Kevin. Thankfully, he was still talking to my friend, so I decided to kill two birds with one stone and just tell him to get out and move the car. And not in that specific way, but the message had to be short and to the point. So as I got closer, I put on a polite smile and simply said, "Excuse me, Kevin," but Kevin didn't pay any attention. My friend noticed that I was approaching and trying to call Kevin, but before she could respond or do anything, Kevin stepped right between us and continued talking. Any gesture or action my friend took in order to indicate that I wanted to talk to him was completely ignored. So I had to come in closer and say, "Kevin," but he still continued to ignore me. At that point, I was fed up with his behavior, so I decided to just tap him on the shoulder and tell him that his car is being towed. At least I tried. The only thing I managed to do was tap him on the shoulder. And then all hell broke loose. Kevin turned around with a pure look of hate and disgust on his face that I was left speechless. "Excuse me, can't you see I'm having a conversation here? What is so important that you have to interrupt it?" He exclaimed it so loudly that everyone heard him. I tried to point out towards him and politely say, "Sorry, but before I could utter another word, Kevin simply cut me off. "Do you see me cutting into someone else's conversation or interrupting someone else's activities?" For the record, yes, he does that frequently. But I kept that answer to myself because I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. At that point, my friend also tried to step in and say something, but he interrupted her as well. "Please, my dear, do not defend this swine. I have a feeling I know what he wanted to say." And with an exaggerated hand gesture, he took a step back and pointed towards the table with the food. "There you go. Your way is clear. Now do move along, because we have some important matters to discuss, and they might be a little too advanced for the likes of you." Not gonna lie, a good portion of me wanted to punch him then and there. But the rational side of my head did stop me from doing so. If I did punch him, he would win and I'd be in trouble, so I refrained myself from doing anything. And just as a side note, yes, I am chubby, but I'm not that fat or gluttonous. I'm just lazy, so I don't work out much. Granted, I did start training recently, so hopefully I will lose the extra weight I have. But I digress. Let's get back to the story. So, while Kevin was berating me and making fun of me, a couple of people did step in to stop us from arguing, but I asked them to stop and just told them I would go home. I did this for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I was too embarrassed to stay. Second, everyone saw who Kevin really was, so if I stayed, this would just escalate into something worse. The third and the most important reason was, I saw the tow truck pulling in. So if I stayed any longer, Kevin would probably find a way to blame this on me. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one who noticed the tow truck. So as I was exiting the building, my master stopped me for a second and asked me, "Were you trying to warn Kevin about the tow truck?" When I admitted that was my intention, the master simply hugged me and apologized for what I had to go through. And as an added bonus, he didn't mention the tow truck to Kevin at all. So when I got out, I went to the guy who called the tow truck and told him that I couldn't find the owner of the car. Surprisingly, the man had a very mischievous grin on his face when I told him that, and simply responded with, "I figured that might be the case, but thank you for trying." And then he gave me a 20. For my next coffee, as he put it. So yeah, I think he overheard Kevin at some point. And speaking of Kevin, he finally noticed the tow truck and that his car was being towed away. So he rushed out in panic in order to stop it. "Wait! What are you doing with my car?" To the trucker's credit, he didn't even flinch when he heard him yell. He just turned around and simply told him, "What does it look like, pal?" Without missing a beat, Kevin replied with, "You are stealing my car, and I can have you arrested for this. Luckily for you, I'm in a good mood today, so if you will just release it, I will forget this whole incident." The tow trucker didn't even bat an eye on this threat. He simply told him, "Look, buddy, you see the sign? You see this car? That sign says this space is for disabled, and I don't see any disabled markings on this car." I swear, tow truckers usually get a lot of hate from us, but at that moment, that man was a hero in my eyes. Actually, not a hero, but a legend. In Kevin's case, he saw a man who was, quote-unquote, stealing his car. He started threatening him with police charges, lawsuits, and whatnot, but the driver was simply ignoring him. He simply secured the car to the winch and went back to the truck in order to drive off. At that point, Kevin tried to jump him in a last-ditch effort to stop him. Realizing what he was about to do, I quickly stepped in order to restrain him. When he saw me, Kevin's vision turned red. "You! Of course it's you! Who else would be so malicious to do such a horrible thing to me?" As those words left his lips, a childish part of my brain just took over and I responded with, "Who, me? I'm too pig's-headed and dumb. I don't know how to operate a phone." That sent Kevin over the edge. He swung his fist in an attempt to punch me, but that promptly failed because I grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. The man with the crutch quickly went for his phone and tried to call the police. But before he could dial the number, my master showed up and asked what was happening. Without blinking, Kevin started accusing me of assault, attempted robbery, collaboration with a car thief, and I think it was drug abuse at some point. A long story short, he was presenting himself as an innocent victim of a very violent and rabid lunatic. As he finished his testimony, the whole area went silent. And we did gather quite the audience at that point. A few neighbors were at their doorsteps or windows looking at the source of the commotion. Every member from our club came out to see what was going on, and a few passerbys simply stood there and watched. At that point, I wasn't paying attention to any of them. I was focused on my master because he looked like he was about to blow a fuse.
Kevin, grab your things and get out of my sight. And if you try to do anything like this to Bedomy again, I will personally lock you up forever.
Kevin went silent. Without a word, he entered the building and left as quickly as he entered. He didn't even bother to pick up his car. And to this day, nobody has heard a word from him. And that's about it for this story. I hope you all enjoyed it and that you will come back for another one. If you have any suggestions or comments, please let me know. And the same goes for your stories if you have any to share. Until next time, my name has been Bedomy. Thank you very much for watching and good night.